if you're going to buy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex in Oregon, then one of the major considerations you need to be thinking about is how you're going to manage the property. And management means a whole lot of things. It means finding tenants, it means screening tenants, it means taking care of the physical aspects of the property, it means lease renewals, it means tenant relations, it means all sorts of things. Now, there's lots of different ways to do it, but forgetting to think about management as a major consideration in your buying decisions and your buying strategy would be a major mistake. And so that's why it's so important you have a real estate agent who knows the ins and outs of property management themselves. And so in today's video, we're going to talk about the different models that you could employ when it comes to managing your property, the pros and cons of each of them, and a few bits of my own experience to share with you on this. Okay, let's start with option number one is you can manage the property yourself. Okay. So obviously, if you're to manage the property yourself, there's going to be some pros and there's going to be some cons of these different things. So one of the pros, in my opinion, maybe you wouldn't agree necessarily that this is a pro, but I think it is that you're going to get to learn the business by being super hands-on. Now, learning the business is something that's going to make you a more well-rounded real estate owner, a more well-rounded real estate investor. Now, whether you're buying this duplex, this triplex, this fourplex to live in it yourself, you're buying it just purely as an investment. Knowing the business of property management is a real benefit. Now, in my own experience for the last 20 some years owning rental properties, I started by self-managing, and then I had a management company for a period. And then I went back to really deciding to become a master at managing properties myself and to not just know the business generally, but to master the business of property management as well. So learning the business is a really great thing, in my opinion, that you will get as a benefit of managing your own property. Another benefit is then you'll save money. Now we're going to come back to something you're going to spend if you're saving money, but you're going to spend something else. I'll come back to that in a moment. But you're going to save money because a management company is going to cost money. You know, they're not going to do their work for free. They're going to take a percentage of the rents as a fee and some other fees as well. But you're going to save money if you decide to do it that way. Another pro of managing the property yourself is what I consider quality control. When you are hands-on doing the management yourself, you get to make sure that you feel good about the tenants you place and the screening criteria you have and the way that the property is kept up and all of the little details of making sure the whole operation is up to your own personal standards and just the various aspects that we might call quality control of tenants, quality control of the property itself, financials, everything. So to me, that's another huge benefit is you have so much more control over everything that's happening and you can make sure it lives up to your standards. There are some cons in self-managing a property as well. And one of them is that in Oregon, especially, landlord-tenant law is a lot. There is a lot to know. And it's not just a lot to know, it's a lot to keep up with because it is constantly changing. And as you may know, Oregon as a state is very interested in protecting tenants and protecting housing and trying to make housing affordable. So the set of laws overall are much more geared towards the protection of tenants than they are the protection of landlords. And so there is a lot of stuff to know and a million little tiny details, a million little landmines you could very inadvertently step on and cause yourself a problem. So that's definitely a con is you have to become an expert in that or take on the risks of not being an expert in that. The second thing is I said one of the pros of self-management is you would save money. Well, the flip side of that coin is you will spend something else, and that's time and energy. You will spend your own time and energy in lieu of spending money for the management of your property. So if you don't have a lot of time or energy for that or physical capability to do it, then that could be a downside for you with self-management as an option. Another factor is that you are then the front line as it relates to the needs of your property and the needs and questions of your tenants. This can be a big deterrent for a lot of small landlords who are doing it for the first time. They don't want to be the front line. I've heard people now, please know I do not endorse this perspective, but I have heard people say, oh, you just tell the tenants that you're just the manager, you're not the owner. And then you can always sort of blame it on the owner or say, I'll have to get back to you after I talk to the owner. I don't believe in that. I think that that's really silly. I think it's kind of cowardly and unprofessional as well. So I don't recommend that. But it speaks to the fact that being the front line for your tenants can be challenging, and they're going to come to you. And especially if you live in one unit, for instance, and they're right next door to you, then you might feel like you're always at risk of having somebody knock on your front door. And then one of the last con I wanted to mention is that physical needs happen with real estate, right? I mean, from everything as simple as keeping the grass cut if there's grass, keeping the landscaping up, to fixing little things that happen and come up here. Physical repairs, maintenance is a real part of being a real estate owner, being a landlord. So you then have to handle those yourself. Now that doesn't mean you have to know how to swing a hammer yourself. I'll tell you what, I'm pretty useless when it comes to a set of tools. But even when I'm self-managing the property, it's still on me to figure out who is going to solve the physical issues that come up. So that means I'm calling this contractor, I'm calling this maintenance company, I'm calling this plumber or whoever it might be to troubleshoot and ultimately resolve problems. So it's handling repairs, it's coordinating repairs as well. So you can self-manage your property, and it can be an excellent, excellent strategy. And if that's what you want to do, I'd be in full support of it. I hope you'll have your eyes open about the things you need to become proficient in and expert about, such as landlord-tenant law, and all of the many, many things that kind of go along with that and dovetail into it, like how to advertise units and how to screen people and stay within the laws and renewals and all that kind of stuff. Uh, the second option is to hire a management company. So hiring a management company is going to be a very different experience for you than self-managing your property. And there are, of course, pros to this and there are cons to this as well. So let's go through that list as I have experienced it myself. One of the pros is that it's obviously going to be less work for you if you have a management company that is doing most of the work. You're paying them to take on the workload of this, and so it's going to be less work for you. You're going to be more hands off. I hesitate to use the word passive because there are still aspects of being a property owner that you can't completely get rid of, that you can't abdicate, you can't wash your hands of, but it is certainly going to be less work on a day-to-day basis. As I mentioned in my own journey, I've self-managed, I've had a management company. I've basically built a management company inside my own company and have had an in-house property management department in my own company for many years now. And we have a number of units right now that we are strongly considering going back to hiring a management company so that we don't have to manage the management effort quite as much and employ our own property manager in-house and worry quite as much about things like maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So there are different pros and cons, and one of them is that this chapter in my portfolio, and as I record this, we have 50 some units. I would like to have a little bit less work that comes across my desk in management. And so we're looking at hiring a management company because that's one of the pros. Another one of the pros is you don't need to learn as much landlord tenant law. Now, I am careful to say as much because it really would behoove you to know at least the basics so that you can have an intelligent conversation with your own management company. And you don't want to just be blind to, I think you've exposed yourself if you have no idea what's going on with landlord tenant law. So you still have to have some kind of concept and maybe stay up to date with some of the most basic and foundational things that are changing and going on. But you don't have to know that every single little detail as nearly as much when you have a management company because you're paying them to become the experts on that for you. And then another major thing is that the management company will handle repairs. Now, they won't handle repairs for free. Obviously, you're going to have to pay either their maintenance techs to do the work or pay them to coordinate the work. So it still comes at a cost to you, but the coordination effort can be a lot easier when they're handling that for you. Maybe the cost might be less as well. Maybe they get things done faster as well, which then leads to tenant satisfaction and less turnover and all those types of things. So having somebody else at the sort of playing the point guard on handling repairs and maintenance can be really, really helpful too. But I would say there are some cons to having a management company as well. One of the cons, of course, is it costs money, right? So just like we discussed with self-management, two sides of the coin. You save money here, but you spend time. Well, in this case, now you're not spending time, but you are spending money instead. And so every property management company is going to have different rates. I would say, roughly speaking, 8% is probably pretty common, or sort of a pretty average kind of a cost. But there's going to be costs for lease up and new tenancies and maintenance costs and things like that. Project coordination, if something unique comes up, perhaps as well. Every management company is going to have its own model and pricing menu, but there are going to be costs, monetary costs for you as a result as well. Secondly, in my opinion, you're going to have less quality control because you're trusting the manager's judgment on everything, and you have less say in every little thing, which is kind of what you want if you're hiring a management company. You don't want to be meddling in every little thing, but one of the trade-offs is you're going to have probably less quality control overall. It's very possible that they're not going to have necessarily the same perspective that the owner will. It's maybe crude to say they won't care as much as you will, but there's a little bit of truth to that as well. So you will have to then, con number three, you'll still have to manage the manager, right? Nothing's gonna go well if you just wash your hands of all responsibility for your property. You're still gonna need to manage your manager and make sure that they're doing what they say they're gonna do, that they are maintaining the standards that you want and need them to maintain, et cetera. So there are some cons to hiring a property management company as well. But the third option I wanted to share with you is what I would call a hybrid option. And a hybrid option could mean a lot of different things, but generally, hybrid just simply means you kind of mix and match a little bit of the best of both models. You do the parts that you want to do yourself, and then you hire out the other parts. And there's a lot of different ways that you could configure that, of course. But let me give you just two examples that I see frequently in dealing with my clients and talking to peers who own lots of rental properties and things like that. Example number one would be where you don't want to get involved with tenant placement. Maybe you just are concerned that you don't have the criteria and the ability to find a great tenant, and you want to pass that off to somebody else. Make sure that tenant is properly screened. You don't want to do the advertising. Maybe you don't want to do the showings. So you hire a leasing agent to place a tenant for you, and then you pay them for that service, of course. But once the tenant is placed, then you take over and you do the management from there forward. I've seen this many times, and this can work fine for certain people who have certain sets of skills. If you like making repairs, for instance, you like puttering around the property and cutting the grass and all that kind of stuff. But the idea of a bad tenant with a bad credit history scares you, or you don't know maybe the tools or technology needed to have a proper application and screening process, then that's a great model for somebody in that particular kind of situation. Let me give you a very different example. I have one brokerage client right now listing their Four-Plex, and this is how they do it. They actually manage the property themselves, kind of, but with almost like a freelance manager, but it's sort of an in-house thing. But then for any maintenance issues, they have one single company that they go to for all of their maintenance issues. So they have an established relationship with this company. When they call and say, "Hey, we need X, Y, or Z done," or a tenant has got this request, or some blinds broke, or anything like that, they simply call this one company, and that one company is very familiar with the property because they're out there pretty often doing those types of repairs, and that company takes care of it. So they self-manage the property with a little bit of help, and then so they do the tenant placement and screening and all that kind of stuff. But then when it comes to repairs, They keep their hands off it. They just make a phone call and somebody else does it. And that works well for them. So that's a very much a hybrid approach as well. So here's the thing. There's really no right answer or wrong answer when it comes to different ways you can manage the duplex, the triplex, the fourplex that you are buying in Oregon. The wrong answer would simply be to not think it through very well or to not realize that management, landlord tenant law is are major parts of the considerations for buying 2 to 4 unit properties, small plexes, small multifamily properties. And that's why I think it's important that you have an agent you work with who is really well versed in that kind of stuff. I had a meeting this morning with a property owner who owns a fourplex, and he's considering listing it. And as we were talking, he said, well, there's a lot of real estate agents around here. And I said, yeah, that's very true. However, you might not need a real estate agent. What you really need is a Plex consultant because these products are unique. Any way you cut it, there's going to be tenant occupied aspects of this whole thing. Most realtors are not intimately familiar with the ins and outs of tenant occupancy, and how could they be, because it's changing all the time, and unless it's your full-time job, it is really hard to stay up to date with what's going on in Oregon, all parts of Oregon. And Portland's got its own rules that are kind of an overlay on top of Multnomah County, which might have its own rules, which is an overlay on top of the state of Oregon. These are going to be a little bit different in Deschutes County and Bend and Redmond. So it's very important that you consider strongly that you have an agent who really, really gets property management, landlord tenant law, all the stuff that goes with it. I'm Jeff from Oregon Plex. If you'd like to discuss buying or selling a Plex with me, please give me a call anytime, 503-869-7303. Send me an email. Check out the website, jeff@oregonplex.com. And I look forward to talking to you about your situation and helping out however I can. Take care.